Welcome to Sons of Patriarchy. Before we dive into today's episode, we want to take a moment to provide a content warning. In this episode, we'll be discussing sensitive topics including emotional, spiritual, and sexual abuse. We understand that these subjects can be triggering for many listeners. If you find yourself feeling uncomfortable or need to take a break, please feel free to pause or skip to a later segment. Your well-being is our top priority. We encourage you to reach out for support if you need it. There are resources available to help you through difficult times, and those can be found in our show notes and intake forms private support communities, which are screened. Thank you for being here with us today. Welcome to Veneer of Righteousness, Abuse in the CREC, Part 5. In this episode, you'll hear from Hayley McCord, a former student at New St. Andrews. You'll also hear from an anonymous woman who has deep family connections in Christchurch, Moscow, also with a story of her own, and an anonymous couple who are members of a CREC in the Pacific Northwest. As we get deeper into these stories, you'll begin hearing some themes repeated throughout and patterns of abuse behavior. These themes, patterns, and more will become clearer the longer you listen to the series. Our hope is this better enables you, the listener, to spot these in your own contexts, help others do the same, or if you find yourself in these situations, name what was unnameable previously. Let's begin with our first story, that of Hayley McCord.
Yes. So I was the daughter of, I was one of 4 kids. The only girl in my family, a big Christian conservative family. And I was born in Pennsylvania with my brothers. And my parents started reading a lot of Doug Wilson's literature when I was young. So I remember seeing his books around in like Canon Press stuff in the house. I probably was 6 or 7. And then they there was a number of reasons why they decided to move out to where Douglas Wilson was running his
This
church.
is what, the late 90s-ish?
Late 90s, yeah. Where he was running his church because they also wanted to homeschool, and homeschooling in Pennsylvania was quite rigid, what you could and couldn't do. And so they that was another reason. Also, my mom was into naturopathy and wanted to be involved with that, and that's big in Washington State. So there's a lot of good reasons for them to go. And so they ended up selling the home that they built. My dad's an architect. They built it and moved out there with basically nothing. My dad actually went out first, found like a sort of like a homestead in the woods, about 40 minutes outside of Spokane. And we had a house out there. And it was in a few months of us moving that we founded the church, the Christchurch Spokane branch of Christchurch. And then around that time is when I met Doug, because my parents had been kind of on the fence about infant baptism, but they wanted us to be baptized by Doug. And so when he was in town, which wasn't that often, he came every other month to visit. They had us baptized. So that was when I met him. My dad recorded it. We do have a home video somewhere.
Born across the country, the family moved to the Pacific Northwest for the lenient laws surrounding homeschooling, which is a wonderful point of contact in that area with Doug Wilson. Now, how involved did the McCords become in this world?
Well, we were in Spokane, so Logos was not there. That was in the big Moscow. We had the Oaks Christian Academy in Spokane, which was a very similar school. My parents really wanted to homeschool, so that was not even really on the table. They liked their homeschooling, and we used a lot of the curriculum that the Oaks used. I'm blanking on some of the things, but we used a lot of books straight from canon. We also used a lot of Latin. We did a lot of Latin, similar to what they were teaching there. So the classical Christian aspect of my education was identical. I will say there was a lot of hierarchy within the church circles of you go to the Oaks, you go to, I don't know, some other like private school, or you're homeschooled. And there was like this hierarchy, like Oaks being the top and homeschooling somewhere at the bottom. But again, my mom was we were living very isolated. We also were doomsday preppers in that sense, like Y2K and all that. So we were living kind of off the land. A lot of my mom was really into organic farming. So we had gardens, we got our cow slaughtered, the whole 9 yards, no vaccines for my brothers. So that lifestyle was a lot of people, I would say, in the Oaks Christian Academy and No Logos and all that. They were a lot more mainstream when it came to that stuff. So my mom wasn't. So she wanted to make sure we didn't do that. And we had no TV, no radio as well. But yeah, as far as the circles, I mean, we went to church every week. We were part of the initial kind of, I guess, seedling pod people that started the church, because at the time we didn't have a building, we were in a house. Mm-hmm. We were literally doing communion in a house with like someone's upright piano in the corner and like fold up chairs and stuff. And then we would all like split up at the end, and the kids would run around and be wild and slam each other's hands and doors and whatever else while the parents talked in the kitchen. A lot of big families. I would say there were some families. We had one family in there with 18 kids from the same parents, another family with 11 kids. So there was a lot of crossover, I think more so in the Spokane group with people from Idaho, northern Idaho, which has a very bad reputation. Just a lot of very kind of no, I don't want to say Mennonites, but like there were like some strains of like that, like where the girls would wear like very traditional dresses that they made themselves and like all that stuff. Which you didn't see as much in the Moscow side. I feel like the Moscow side, there was like your more typical American family type of vibe. Yeah. So yeah, my interaction was pretty much only in Spokane until I was about 18. And then of course I did end up going, I was 19. Yeah. I did a brief stint at Bob Jones University, cannot recommend. And then I went to their college, New St. Andrews, kind of against my own better judgment, but because my home life was really bad, my parents had a lot of marital issues, and there was some abuse and toxicity. I decided, better than nothing. And the guy I was seeing at the time, well, I say seeing, like we didn't even really see each other, just in emails, but he was from Christchurch. He was very, very worried about this for me because he had gotten out. He was at some, I can't remember where he was. He was at like, I want to say a private school, Grove City, I think. And he was like, don't go to NSA, because he literally, and I've probably this email somewhere. He was literally like, you will get married off. Like, don't go. Like, I'm worried about you. And I was like, no, I'll be fine. Like, I have my own mind. I'm not going there to get married. They did call the degree an MRS degree. Just throwing that out there. Mm-hmm. But there were lots of people too that were there very much like from freshman year, like, he's cute, I want to marry him, like very much like obsessed with that already, where I was just kind of like, okay, I just got here, like, don't know what's going on with that. But yeah, so there was like a lot of, and let me back up too, because there was one other interaction I did mention with Moscow, is that I did a lot of the balls. So Moscow, we did a lot of balls where there's a lot of dancing, and that was also a very high intensity situation where it was more like, this is kind of the first step towards courtship. So a guy you might meet at this ball who might ask you to dance, he might eventually like you. And there was also a lot of stress about like, oh, so-and-so danced with this girl more than once. Oh my God, they're like, that means something. And where for someone who's very young, like 15, that's such a big deal when you're that age, right? Because it's like guy you like is not asking you to dance. Like your night is ruined. And Moscow was a really big proponent of the dances, and they brought them to Spokane. So we even actually made one year I had I'd made my own hoop skirt. I don't know what a hoop skirt is, but it was really big back in the 1800s, where you had like the tiny waist and then the skirt went out. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it was like very much like, I guess, a way for young people to interact in a very supervised setting with really cool music. I mean, we usually have like a live band, and it was really fun, or we were outside. But yeah, that kind of carried me into when I did go to NSA, that same vibe of, every interaction was very highly charged, like who you studied with, who you, I don't know, went and get ice cream with. Like, it's always a big, like, who's in your group? Because it was kind of like, that could be who you married, right? It's not like it was slim pickings, where there's only like 200 people or whatever in the whole school, or even less. Yeah. And then that's how I got more involved in the Moscow side, because when I did go to church, which I tried to do every Sunday, I had a car at that point. I would pick between the main one, and there was a couple other ones in town. I think, I can't remember some of the the buddies of Doug had their own churches there. So I went there as much as I could. So but I mean, it was different because it wasn't my church, so I didn't know a lot of people. So I was kind of in the back and slipping through the cracks into sin.
From that original point of contact that was the homeschool movement, Hayley's parents dove into the Christian classical schooling model, and we'll have more on that later in the series, and started utilizing the materials from Canon Press, Logos School, and Oaks Academy. But those weren't the only points of contact. Core to this movement is parental corporal punishment, a rather sinister phrase that describes the discipline philosophy employed by parents and others towards children. McCord describes what she saw, what happened to her, and what this led to.
So my family, I want to throw out there that like it's probably pretty hard to prove some of the things that I'm going to talk about, but especially Christchurch, Spokane, we had a lot of people with kids. Like I would say, most of the people were under 45. They had kids, young kids. They were pregnant, often pregnant. And so there was a culture of these kids have to be part of the service because they are like what's it called? The quivers, the bow and quiver, or whatever.
The quiver. Yeah.
Yeah. So absolutely no Sunday school. That's for shitty churches. We have them in the service, and we have a service that's at least 2 hours long, no breaks. And it's a lot of standing and kneeling and standing and kneeling and sitting and standing and kneeling, something that a 2-year-old will never be able to do. And so there was a ton of pressure on the families to have children that were insanely well behaved, right? Kids that, and since then, it's really interesting. I've nannied professionally for over 10 years. So I've nannied over 30 kids. And now that I know so much more about kids and behavior, even them sitting through a 20-minute long piano lesson is impossible at 4, right? Mm-hmm. And we're talking kids that just, they aren't even vocal yet, that are being forced to sit through a service. So part of the way to get that done, and this is coming from the top because the top is saying kids need to be in the service, was to discipline them physically. Mm-hmm. And so part of that was that the fathers, let me shut the door, the fathers would come with the implements for the abuse on their person, and you could see it. So they would
at church you can see it. Okay.
So they would
I've heard like they sold these leather like little strap things that they would use for spanking.
Really? I never saw. I saw rulers and wooden spoons in pockets.
Now I guess it's come out that like they actually sell spanking instruments at Christchurch.
Wow. Well, I guess I was rustic, so we just had what was on the kitchen counter. But we had some people that would like, on top of it, we went from a home to a farmer's grange and then eventually to a pretty old, dilapidated wooden church. Mm-hmm. So you could hear everything. I mean, you could hear, the cars outside, you could hear everything. So you could hear when someone's disciplining their kids. Oh. And they would intentionally do it during the service to instill, I think, this kind of general atmosphere on all of us that have, we screwed up. They
would spank during service.
Oh, yeah. We would have kids screaming their parents' names in the bathroom. Daddy, please stop. Daddy, please stop. Daddy, please stop. Daddy, please stop. Oh, yeah. And we had 2 or 3 families that were exceptionally abusive. Like it was every week. And then there were like some people that, barely happened. Or the other thing you would see is kids, you don't even see what they did wrong, right? I don't know what it was. They dropped a pencil. Their parents really grabbing their wrist and like ripping them out of the service. They're bawling, they know what's coming. And maybe we don't hear the beating, but we all know that that's what's going on because of how pissed the parents were. They were so mad, right? And I'm like, what did they even do? Like no one even saw anything. Jeez. Thankfully we were, number one, older. So we were able to sit through the service, but that culture was very much prevalent in our home. And so my dad, as the leader, the head of the household, he would often save that holy rage for home. So the thing is they had these meetings that I always hated these days, because on Sundays, there was a Sunday a month that they had heads of household meetings where the men would meet and the women could not join.
Mm-hmm.
So when my dad went to those meetings, I don't know what was spoken about, but he would emerge from that meeting with a very aggressive, very like power hungry, abusive stance, and we all knew that. Like my brothers and my siblings and I did not like those days, because he would definitely was prone to hit us more those days.
After the meetings, the head household meetings?
Yeah.
Okay. And
what they called them in my family, because we, I don't know what other people did, but we called them infractions. And what that meant is
I've heard that.
There was a long list of what those could have been. It could have been talking back. It could have been, I don't know, not doing something fully, a task fully, being asked more than 10 times to do it. I don't know. But there was also they used the Westminster Catechism as part of it. So I memorized it. And there's one thing in there that says, that one verse is, God's names, titles, attributes, ordinances, and works are things that are holy. And so as part of that, we weren't allowed to say, oh my goodness. We weren't allowed to say, oh my word, even though that's very tame swearing, if you want to call it that, because those are God's attributes. So things like that were infractions. So there was number one, if you did something like that, like use your mouth to do something, like say something. I even remember saying, I think at one point, shit. And that was like, as if I had committed murder, right? Like it was that bad, right? Anyway, we would have to eat horseradish, which by the way, if you eat horseradish, it can really mess your stomach up. Yeah.
It's disgusting. Yeah. Sorry if you like horseradish, but yeah, it's not for
they would say go to the fridge and they would watch you eat it too. And then so put soap in your mouth. Usually had to hold it in your mouth for a long time. And I remember literally holding the drool that would come out, because you would open your mouth to stop the pain. And it would be good because if you started to salivate, it hurt less. And I would just be like, close your mouth. I'm like, no, dude. Those were the minor punishments. And then, or being in your room. A lot of times you had to be locked up for the full day, which is really awful. Writing out an apology sometimes. But the most strict was the belt, which was usually used. A belt. One of the, how you close the blinds? I don't know what those are, the little twisty things. That was used mostly, and my dad would mostly do that. But my mom would record how many infractions, and that would equal how much hits we would get. So my only kind of association with my dad from age 10 or 11 up was waiting for him in my bedroom to come home from work and hit me. And I was always messing up somehow. So I was always getting hit. And then my brothers as well. My dad hit my younger brother. I remember there was a few instances where there was a false accusation. So for example, this just shows you how strict they were. We couldn't, of course, lying, absolutely not, can't lie. And my brother's responsibility was to give our rabbit, we had a rabbit in a hutch outside, water and food in the morning. And it's freezing in Spokane in the winter. It gets well below freezing. So he did the water and food or whatever. My dad comes home from lunch, I think it was earlier than normal. He goes out and checks the hutch. The rabbit has barely any water and it's frozen. So his assumption was, you didn't do it. And he was like, I did do it. He's like, no, there's no way. You didn't do it. Come to find out, the water had just frozen because it was that cold. So he had done it. He beat the living heck out of him. I remember to this day, him screaming. And then he was like, oh yeah, like my bad. You didn't lie. At least you didn't lie. I'm like, bro, you punished somebody. You hit somebody. And just hiding outside the bedroom during really bad sessions where I wanted to stop it, but I couldn't. So I just kind of sat outside the room. Yeah. And my mom would often be in there. So it would be kind of my mom would be like, this is what you did. And call my dad sometimes even at work and be like, your kid's out of line. Get back, get him riled up even before he got home. And then where he's stressed with work and doesn't want to deal with this. And then, yeah. So we didn't get punished in the church, but we would often get punished for things we did at church. For example, as a girl, as a woman, the idea is that, you do any and all childcare needed after the service. So if there's kids running around in the service outside on the street, it's your fault as a woman, even though it's not even your kid, not your family. Someone should have been watching that child. And because the moms never stopped having damn kids, they couldn't watch 10 kids. No one can watch, 8 kids, 5 kids, and so I remember there was, we would come, sometimes there were like, as the church kind of expanded, there'd be more church plants. And there was one in Colville and there was one in, another area. I can't remember now, outside of town. I don't know how long they lasted. Some of them didn't like always take off, but we would go to show our support. So some Sundays we'd be like, all right, we're going to trek out to whatever. We're not going to go to art. We'd be like, dang it, we want to go to our church. See our friends. It's like, no, we're going to go out to this other church and show them our support. So we were doing that. And there was like a couple of like young moms. And my dad told me, like, you need to take care of this lady's baby today. Like if she needs anything, like hold her baby. And I was like, bro, I don't want to watch her baby. I don't know her. Like, yeah, if I know the baby, like I know the family, but I didn't know them. And I gave him like pushback. I remember, I think I was older at that point. I was like 15. And I was like, I'm not doing it. And that was a really big disciplinary session. I remember writing about it in my diary because you're 15 years old. You're way too old to get hit by your dad at that, as a, teenage young woman, So just like the humiliation of that, because, they would make you like lay down and hit you. Like it was really, really bad. So yeah, sometimes, there was a long wait time between when you actually experienced the abuse. So it was very, very anxiety inducing, because you can imagine you're waiting all day in your room for your dad to get home, and maybe he gets home at 8. Maybe he eats dinner first, which sometimes was the case, like a big power play. So yeah, I don't know, like from what you've heard, if you've heard similar things, but there wasn't
very similar.
There wasn't like a
it seems to be the culture. It's like the quote or the phrase that keeps on getting used, and people will hear this throughout the series. It's, you got to beat the sin out of the kid. That's the phrase everyone keeps on using.
There's another Bible verse. I don't know if you know it. It's from Proverbs, and it says something with a stiff neck, and if you beat him, he will not die.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Like, so that's the baseline. Like the bar's on the floor. Like,
yeah.
Yeah. The stiff neck stuff. They always told me I had a stiff neck, and I'm like, don't have a stiff neck. I'm just trying to like be an individual. If someone says, go watch this random baby, I should have the ability to say, I don't want to watch their baby, So yeah, there was a lot of, and I don't remember like there being from the pulpit, beat your kids. I don't know where they were getting this message. I don't know if it was other parents or what, but
it seems to have been a culture, like what you said, of we got to present ourselves in a certain way. And as long as our kids, whether they want to be or not, as long as they look obedient, then that's what they're looking for. It's kids with like outward holiness, even if that's like kind of forced by their parents. It's not what the kid actually wants to do, but they're so scared of getting punished, physically getting punished, that they stay in line. But less so because they want to. It's more so because they're forced to.
Well, and the other thing that I didn't mention also with the guy I was seeing in Moscow is that there is a lot of porn addiction within the circles. Young men, I mean, I've heard from people, and I won't give out names, but like just people, young men told me since the time that, hey, I was addicted to porn, like during that whole time. Like and the guy I was seeing, he even told me at one point, because after everything kind of happened, right before actually, because of Nancy, I actually sent him an email, and he had gone to college at this point. We were still in contact, and I was like, we need to be done with all of this. And he sent me an email back saying, I just, got really convicted at this, I don't know what it was. It's something at a new college. And I feel really bad I didn't tell you that I have porn addiction. And I've been actually waking up every day around 4 or 5 in the morning to watch porn before my parents wake up and clear the history. And I was like, that is addiction. That is crazy. To a teenage guy not sleeping so that he can watch pornography. And that kind of plays into what you're saying with like the external, like we're so holy, we're so religious, we're so good, but then we have like these men that have like are watching seriously messed up things, right?
Unfortunately, we have many, many more stories of the same. Maybe you remember Tony Baker, former chief operating officer at New St. Andrews from a few weeks back. He described what he saw within the past few years. Hayley, however, was at New St. Andrews in the late 2000s and early 2010s. She saw and experienced similar. Here's a little bit of what happened.
There was a lot of, I first was kind of put off by the fact that there was no other like women in the staff. So that the professors, and I don't know how it is now in 2024, but back then, this was 2008, 9, they were all male. So, as a woman, it's kind of nice to have, female teachers, professors you can go to. That wasn't the case. And then there was an incident where, and I'm sure they have this on record somewhere, that in Latin class, the guy that taught my Latin class, professor, made me very uncomfortable. He was young. He's probably not even over 28. He was married, had a bunch of kids, but he was very he was very flirtatious with me. It was very inappropriate. There was a lot of just him singling me out in front of the class, like him kind of, he would sit right behind me sometimes when I did go to Christ Church with his family. And I felt like he was just staring at my ass the whole time. Probably was. But the creepy thing is like I passed this class. I did pass the final. I think this was December of that year because I was only at NSA for basically only a year. So the first, they have the quarter system. So after the second quarter, I passed the Latin exam, passed this class. But the thing is, he failed me for attitude, which he can do. And you know what he could also do? Have private Latin classes to catch me up, right? So I'm like, my heart sinks. I'm like, oh my God, get me away from this creepy, nasty man who wants to meet with me alone. Well, my parents, of course, were like, I had this whole trip planned for me to go to Florida to see my dad's sister. All of it fell through. I'm stuck in Moscow over the Christmas holidays in freaking snow with this creep. And thank God one other girl failed, not for attitude, but for actual grades. And so she was there. I just remember the overwhelming relief to know that I was going to be alone with this man. Of course, my parents were like, whatever, get your ass in there, you rebel. But he failed me for attitude because he said I wouldn't talk in class. I always sat in the back. I didn't interact. I didn't do those things, one, because I didn't want to talk to him, but two, because I'm generally like in those situations I get kind of anxious. So I don't really like to raise my hand. I just like to listen. Anyway, so yeah, not a lot of representation, creepy young guys on staff. And then additionally, when the freshman came in, Nancy Wilson gave a talk and she said, anybody who is going through something, whether it be at school or at home, please feel free to come to me. Like I am available. Like you can come to my office anytime. She gave us the address. This is the Doug's house, right? Mm-hmm. So that was like the one spot where I was like, you know what, that I'm going to use that, right? Because I have no, I wasn't close to my family. My parents were extremely, extremely strict and rigid. So I didn't feel like I could come and talk to my mom about anything, boy problems, like anything. So I was like, this lady seems really understanding, only woman that's even come remotely near the school. So I will go. So that ended up actually shooting me in the foot. We will come to that later.
She didn't last long at New St. Andrews, and there's no wonder why. The flirtatious professors, private classes, and more. But she got through her first year. What happened her second year? She continues.
Okay, so that's kind of like where I ended officially my relationship with Doug.
Yeah.
Was this whole year had happened, my freshman year, the weird creepy stuff with the teacher. Then I had this summer of love, I guess. And then I come back for sophomore year. I got my nose pierced, God forbid, right? And I'm feeling good. Like I feel like, hey, I have network, I have friends. I don't need to go back to my shitty home life. I can do this. And then like I guess late summer, I started to feel really guilty about my interaction with this young man. And I felt like, I don't feel good about this because I was raised that, sex is only for marriage. And like, all this stuff. So of course, like I feel like I'm going straight to hell. And I remember I even went to a Catholic church and I was like in there like, duh, like, what am I doing? Like, I'm not even Catholic. Like, so like convince myself I was pregnant wasn't possible. Then I went to Nancy because I was like, you know what? I have all this shit going on. She just seems really understanding. So I drive up to their house, which is kind of on the side of the hill. And I also just, side note, also continue to say I struggle with an eating disorder. And at the time, I didn't even know what that was, right? Because we didn't talk about that.
Yeah.
But I had definitely anorexia with some bulimia. And it was a control mechanism. I know that now whenever I have like go through something bad. But I was like, I want to talk to this lady about this weird thing where I don't eat. Like she's not qualified, not a psychiatrist, like nobody that can be dealing with this. And then on top of it, my parents were very abusive to us and each other. And there was a lot of fighting. I actually went home and there was some blood on the wall from a fight they had had. So really physical stuff. So I wasn't doing well mentally. So I go talk to her. I think we had maybe at least 2 sessions and I felt great. She was really understanding. And she, was just kind of like this young man you're seeing. Cause of course we didn't really, she's like, oh, that sucks. You have an eating disorder. Oh, that sucks. Your parents hit you. Anyway, about the sex. So she like moved back to this guy again. And she was like, let's fix this. Let's not do this anymore. So I like kind of vowed to stop seeing him. And I told him about it. I told him I was going to Nancy and he was very understanding. And we were like, we're just going to hang out. Of course, it'll work. Then I had to go back to Nancy and I was like, it's still happening. So I think it was kind of an open case in her mind because I hadn't actually stopped seeing him and I hadn't stopped fooling around and I had some behavior. But I mean, you're talking about like someone with zero parental input, no relationship with their dad, like somebody who has like, to this day, something I struggle with, right? So of course, the first person I meet, this is going to happen with. They didn't address that. Of course, that doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. So anyway, so that was going on around late August. And then of course, school starts up again. I'm hanging out with the new freshman because that was kind of cool, similar in age as me. And I met a new freshman girl and she was from Christchurch. So her sister was a little older. She was a junior that year and she was freshman. And she came from like a little bit more of a progressive family. And so we kind of got along. And we started hanging out at her older sister's place. So there were like seniors there, guys there. So I'm a little excited. And I moved because as you probably know, within Christchurch, they don't have dorm situations. You have to live with a family. So I was living with a family. It had gone well. And then after that year, I looked for another family. My parents helped me with that. And to be honest with you, I can't remember the name. They were really big in the church and lots and lots of kids. But they had a room. And so I moved my stuff in there over that month of August and they were really sweet to me. And they were like, you know what? Like we're the cool house. And on Sundays, it's God's day. It's the Lord's day. It's the Sabbath. You can grab a beer from the fridge. They're just like, be careful with it. We trust you, you can't grab 5, but they're there. Mm-hmm. And when I was hanging out with these new girls from the freshman year and her sister, they were like, ooh, you live with the cool family. Like, can you grab us a couple beers next time? And I'm like, sure. It's the Sabbath. We're celebrating God.
And this is also kind of the culture there too, isn't it? Like that, like they're big, like they like drinking.
Yeah, they do. And they encourage minors to drink, actually. Yep. So it's more like
those who are listening, this is like not out of the ordinary. It's like, this is what people do. They allow it.
Well, and it attaches back to why, because of the history of Christchurch, because Christchurch, and as you know, they call themselves New St. Andrews because of Scotland and their association with the Scottish Calvinists. And there was a lot of drinking in that culture as well. Also the Puritans.
Yep.
So when the Puritans, not many people know this, the first thing they built was a brewery.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So there was a lot of connection between them. That's why we had the Psalter. We sang from that as well, which was their like singing book. But anyway, as a result of that, there was a lot of minors drinking beer. Mm-hmm. Like not only just within the confines of private homes, but also at church events. So like if there was a potluck, we love to have those. Yeah.
So it wasn't looked down on. It wasn't. Nothing about that stuff was bad in their eyes.
No, absolutely not. No, like we had like there was even like a podcast. I forget what it's called. It's something pub. I don't know what it's called anymore. Doug Wilson did it. Uh-huh. So it was more like, you sit down, you talk about theology over a sign, right? I don't like beer. I live in Germany. I still don't like beer. But they had some hard mics, and that was one of my styles. So I grabbed some lemonade, went down to their place, and my parents had let me drive there. Just for reference, I had a cute car when I got there, and then they needed it, so they took it back for me, and they gave me I think it was like a 1997, 98 Ford Expedition, like the really big ones, and it was gold. And I would, I'd come up on the curb with my like beer, and I'm like, woo, beer delivery. Anyway, so I went to their place. We had literally a hard mics each. And that was that. Mm-hmm. And then school started, so I got pretty busy. And I'm sitting there. I remember exactly where I was. I was sitting studying with some of my best friends, and I got an email from I think it was the school admissions center, whatever. They were like, we're going to have a disciplinary hearing for you. We need you to come in on this day at this time. Like, it's non-negotiable. And these are the people that are going to be there. And I don't even know if I mentioned all of them, but I knew Doug was going to be there. And I was like, it was very out of the blue because I hadn't had an issue yet.
Yeah, you're like why am I going to this disciplinary hearing? What am I being disciplined for?
Right. Like, what? And at first my first thought was definitely the guy. I was like, maybe something came out. I don't know. But that was not what happened. So I came to the hearing with a very naive kind of like, innocent, these are my people, what could happen type of vibe. Right. So I wasn't there. Like, I remember it was hot. I was wearing like really informal clothes. Maybe even flip-flops. It felt like, what could they possibly have against me? I have good grades. Like, I'm a good kid. Like, what could have happened? Right.
And you came to Nancy, like, if you did something wrong, you went to Nancy, like, hey, this is what I did. Like, all this stuff is already out there. Like, what are they going to come with me at? Like, what's going to happen?
Yeah, it was totally wild. So I got there, and I remember it was a side room. So you kind of go into New Standards, you go up the stairs, and there's like, I don't know if you've never been there, but there's like a top floor. And it was in one of those rooms. And it was kind of crammed. There was like a long oblong table, like you would think of at like a trial, like with people on the other side. And Doug and Nate and a couple of my professors, and I can't remember, there was one other guy associated with Doug, not Nate. Is it his son or son-in-law? I can't remember. It's so inbred, I can never remember. Like, it was another guy, and then the older sister of this younger girl was there, and I thought, oh, it's just because they want me to feel safe, kind of like when you are with a guy doctor.
And this is the one that you were drinking with at the house.
Yeah, drinking a beer.
Yeah, drinking a beer, which was accepted, and they encouraged with a lot of other people too. So it wasn't like taboo what you were doing.
No, I literally thought she was there because how like when you're with a male doctor, they send the woman nurse in. Yep. That's what I thought it was, like, just to make me feel safe. Perish the thought of me feeling safe. So I'm sitting there, and they're like, hey, like, we have had a lot of young women in the school. And I'm like, a lot? Okay. Send us emails about your behavior, that they're worried about you, that you're not demonstrating Christ-like behavior. And they're praying for you. They're worried about you. And I was like, who is sending these? No, they haven't come to me. Like, who is sending this stuff? Of course, they're like, it's anonymous, whatever. And they were like, we do know, though, that you have been drinking with minors. You yourself, are, a minor, but you're also kind of, they used it, this idea of you're spreading not only, your sinful actions to these poor young women, but also like you're pulling them down with you, right, into possible illegal behavior. And I was like, well, number one, like, I told them, I was like, the family I'm with, they definitely gave me their permission. I'm not stealing this stuff. I'm not sneaking. Like, they told me it. And they were like, yeah, we don't think anyone in our church would be promoting underage drinking. And I was like, so confused at that point, because it was so incongruous with the stuff that they were saying from the pulpit, from like my whole life. We're talking about since I'm 9 years old, I have seen people drinking with their kids, right? So I was so like, what?
Something doesn't add up. Yeah.
No, it doesn't add up. And then they had some other people talk, other men, which was so inappropriate looking back. But one of the professors was like, I can kind of second this rogue behavior, unpleasant behavior, because I've seen you and how you ride around town on your bike in your short shorts. And I'm like, okay, so you're looking at my short shorts. And then he was like, he said that I reminded him of Pamela Anderson.
Okay.
I didn't even know who that was because I was so sheltered.
Yeah. Okay.
I looked her up later, years later. I'm like, wow, she's kind of hot. Damn. I'm flattered, But yeah, no. And then they were like, and I can't remember how this was fed in. It wasn't fed in a way of like, we know that the words that you have spoken in confidence with Nancy Wilson will be used against you. That's not what they said, but they did say that we know that you have some family problems. We know that you have these other issues going on with people, or like an eating disorder. I can't even remember. That makes us all also very much convinced that you're in a dark place, right? Like you're not fit for this, academic climate or whatever. So that was kind of their reasoning. So then right then and there, they didn't even wait. They were kind of like, our decision hasn't already been made. You're going to be suspended for 2 quarters, which would put me through, I guess, March, April, right? And then they were like, you can, if you change the behavior, if you come back and you beg for forgiveness on your knees, you can, and they use those words, which never haunted me the rest of my life. They were like, you can come back under those conditions. And of course, I don't think they meant physically on my knees, but they meant it in the sense of, we don't see you repentant. So it's not looking good. Like if you change a lot, maybe kind of thing. And then that was it. That was the end of the meeting. That was the end of the day. That was like, go home, pack your stuff type of thing. And I was so looking back, I was in shock because like, it was, when you're that young and everybody, and it's such a small community, everybody and trust turns on you like that. It's really difficult to know what to do, to like even cope. And of course, the last thing I want is to tell my parents, right? Because they're the ones that want this to work, right? So they do send my parents an email because they are the people paying tuition that I'm done. Of course, implicated in that is my parents' failure, my dad's failure, like all that stuff. We can get to that later, but it really influenced their decision to also leave the church. But that night was really scary. It was like, I would say 4 or 5 p.m. I got on my computer. I didn't have that much money in my account, but I had enough to get a one-way ticket out with a Greyhound. And I decided to go as far as Milwaukee because I knew someone there from my previous Bob Jones experience, who I called sometimes when I was going through something. Didn't know if I would make it there, but that was like the general goal. And I didn't even go back to the home where I'd gotten the beer from because I felt like they were also not allies. So I didn't want to go there. So I didn't even get my stuff. I didn't get my clothes. I didn't get my anything. I remember I had like, furniture. I had all this stuff. No. And I pulled out in that huge expedition because I was parked at my friends. We were studying, like I said. And I told them, I'm like, I'm leaving. They kicked me out and I'm leaving. And they were like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm literally leaving. And I remember backing the car up and they were like throwing themselves on the car. They were like beating on the windows, kind of like, don't do this. You're insane. Like, this is not okay. You're not going to be safe. And I was like, this is the last place I feel safe. So I need to get out. And I parked my car at the Greyhound station, left the keys under the wheel. Because back then, I don't know how it is now, Moscow was pretty safe. It wasn't like someone was going to come steal your car. And I got out of there, got out of Dodge. And I mean, I got a lot of calls on my cell because I got lots and lots of, I had like the church calling me. I had the school calling me. I had my pastor from Christchurch calling me in Spokane, my parents. And I really felt like hounded. I really felt like I was literally, and I tell people now, I left a cult because it did really feel like that. Like this kind of like, I physically had to run away with clothes on my back. And that is something that most people don't feel about their communities. You know what I mean? Like they don't feel like they literally have to kind of run out of town on a rail. So yeah, I've actually not even been back to Moscow. I've never set foot in the town again. It's just so triggering. Yeah, but the betrayal of Nancy was shocking. That clearly that information that was shared in private counseling sessions was not private, and that she had shared that with people. That I was so broken by that. Yeah.
She got out. She managed to get away from pressured meetings with those she felt uncomfortable around, the rumors flying around her, and the counseling, quote unquote, provided by Nancy Wilson, capstoned by the disciplinary hearing NSA held over her. There is much more going on under the hood at New St. Andrews than providing a classical education. Much more. Now, for those who find themselves in the situation Hayley was in, what advice would she give you? For those who've gotten out, what would she say?
Okay. So if you're already in it and you're kind of, this decision has been made for you, which is kind of the side I was on.
Yep.
Don't ever question your gut. I would say if you feel like intuitively like, hey, something doesn't feel right, something feels off, I don't feel safe, right? That is a very evolutionary reaction. If you don't feel safe, like that is your body and mind being very honest. I would listen to that, right? So I would respect it. And I think if you are feeling those feelings, I think that's your first really big warning sign. And I would almost guarantee you that if you're already feeling that, you're going to start seeing a lot more things that rub you the wrong way. So that's going to be your first red flag is when you feel it in your gut. And then if you're not there and you think, it sounds very beautiful, very utopic, very nice. I would caution you to not change your whole life for this group. Don't move somewhere. Don't give up your community and friends, because I watched my parents do it, and I didn't even have a relationship with my grandparents, and they're dead now. I didn't know anybody in my community growing up. I don't have any friends from high school. It's such a big thing to do, especially if you're still young, because you're giving up so much of your youth kind of to something. So you have to be really sure about that, because my parents were early 30s and they spent till they were in their late 40s doing stuff like this, and they didn't get much out of it. They just have very separated relationships, and they have a daughter that lives in another continent. And the other thing is, it's one thing to make this decision for yourself. If there are kids involved, I would say it's an absolute no, because they are not able to make these decisions. They can't decide what to believe in. They can't baptize themselves. They can't do any of it. So yeah, kids change the whole story. If you have kids, I would say stay away.
Gotcha. Well, any parting thoughts, any parting wisdom from the stuff that you've been through? Maybe speak as Hayley, talking through what you've been through, and say, hey, this is what I want to leave you with.
Well, I'm a strong feminist because of what happened. I'm a strong ally for many groups that are, whatever it may be, whatever it is that you are fighting for. If you are suppressed, repressed, if you're silenced, I'm there for you. And I think that's a good takeaway. I don't think I would have felt that way if I hadn't, been through what I've been through. It certainly isn't something that's talked about in Doug Wilson circles. There's not a lot of open-mindedness about these things. So yeah, I think it changed me. Definitely there's a lot of trauma, but it also changed me and it made me a strong person. I don't think if I hadn't gone through that, I would be a strong enough person to say, hey, I'm going to move to another continent and speak another language and build a life. Like, that's not something you hear every day. And my life is, awesome, right? I get to travel the world, and, I live in this gorgeous apartment in the middle of the European city. So I can't say that it's going badly for me. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's initially why I was interested in doing this at all, is because I said, this is a good story. This is a happy story. This is a good ending. This isn't, what it could have been. It could have been really bad.
Sure. Yeah. And the last one, we'll be asking this to a lot of people, just because of what it did to them. What did this do to your view of religion and the Christian faith being under Doug?
Well, it definitely destroyed it. So I don't have any relationship with any organized religion at this point. Haven't for probably a decade. I do at a church sometimes, kind of on Easter and the Catholic, into also some of the Catholic holidays. But I do live in southern Germany, so there's a lot of churches. I do understand things about art and music that most people wouldn't because of my background. I really appreciate that. The classical Christian education or classical education is quite good. So, I can stand in front of a Caravaggio or Da Vinci and I can tell you all of what the Latin means and I can tell you what the story is. So in that sense, they kind of prepared me for Europe in a lot of ways. What was the other part of the question?
It's a lot of those who have left the cult. Have their faith is destroyed. So maybe talk about that. Yeah, no, I for a while I was like very just anti any religion. And then in the last 3, 4, 5 years, I had a small health crisis and really found a lot of structure and beauty in Buddhism. I am a now certified yoga teacher, so a lot of the principles of Buddhism and mindfulness I apply in my everyday life, and it's really helped me with some of my trauma and struggles and anxiety and panic. Because after leaving, I struggled. I was in the hospital 3 times for a mental health crisis. And like I said, I do also have an eating disorder. But I don't have any relationship with any particular church. I don't like churches. They make me uncomfortable. And my brother had a Christian wedding and it was very hard for me to get through. There was some stuff that was really harmful that was being said about women and all that stuff. So I think it's a slippery slope, to be honest with you. I don't think Doug Wilson is just, I don't think he appeared in a vacuum. I think it's how you interpret the Bible. And if you want to interpret the Bible in a way that's hateful and problematic, you can, right? Because the Bible is not, it's very fluid, right? You can really go any way with it. So, I think the whole situation made me very cautious about what the dangers of kind of extremism. And I really do think Doug Wilson is an extremist. Mm-hmm. And then I went and got a security degree and studied a lot about extremism. So religion is very destabilizing, in my opinion, to communities and cultures and things like that. It can be a good thing, but it can also be very bad. So got to be careful. Next, I talked to an anonymous woman with extensive connections to Moscow and Christ Church. She has experienced heartache at the church as a result of their members and leadership, and also has an insider's look at the culture of the church as well. Here's the interview in full. All right, so we got another person coming in who will not be named, but has connections to higher ups at Christ Church and the overall movement. So we'll begin with the first question, being that you're related, and we won't talk about how you're related to Christ Church members. Can you tell us about the culture of the church and tell us the good and the bad?
Okay, well, yes, I am related to a number of people in Christ Church, and I have seen and experienced from the inside what it's like. When I first came into contact with Christ Church and its culture, it was a very positive experience. Everyone was very warm and welcoming. When you're in Moscow, Idaho, it often seems like you're in one big family. You meet church people at the park, at the grocery store, out walking, or at cultural events. And they make you feel special and loved and accepted. There's a very strong culture of solidarity and belonging. But there's also a very strong feeling of us versus them. Christ Church against the world. Christ Church against the liberals that are threatening to destroy Christianity. Christ Church against those lukewarm, feminine Christians who are too weak to stand up to today's secular culture. Very quickly, I began to sense that the people in Christ Church saw themselves as special, even better than most of the rest of the world and other Christians. The community was showcased as a model the world needed to follow, the kind of new Geneva that would be at the center of changing the world. There was an arrogance that permeated everything they did. From their manner of worship, their theological beliefs, their system of education, to the way they raised their children to be robust, strong Christians who would carry on the legacy of faith for generations because they believed, behaved, and spread the biblical model. These people were very assured in their beliefs, and if another way of doing things was brought up, you were very quickly made to feel like you were pretty dumb not to see that their point of view was the absolute truth. They have perfected a certain kind of rhetoric that is very difficult to counter, except that it ends up being a one-sided dialogue that goes in circles, and you realize that they aren't really listening to you. There are non-verbalized expectations in the community that everyone follows. If you don't conform to these, you are looked at with suspicion. Within families, it even becomes a question of bringing shame to the family. You don't kneel during the time of confession at church, or put your hands up during the doxology. You are asked and then begged to do so, or by not doing it, you are bringing shame to your family. There's a strange paradox of legalism and antinomianism. You will find people dancing, smoking, drinking, even swearing. And yet, if you do not believe in homeschooling or Christian school, and it has to be the right kind of Christian school, you are sinning. People who question the beliefs or the actions of the church are very quickly seen as siding with the enemy and contributing to Satan trying to destroy God's work. There's an adulation of the persona of Doug Wilson. He is seen as having a special gift from God and a calling not unlike the Apostle Paul or Old Testament prophets. It gives him the right to speak in derogatory terms and insult others because Jesus and Paul both did this according to their interpretation. Their culture encourages marriage and having children as being one of the highest callings because this is one of the ways that they plan to transform culture. Marriage is also seen as a solution to many problems like lust and pornography. Young people that marry early and start having kids are praised and seen as good examples. Families with lots of children are smiled upon and approved. There is an exterior appearance of the perfect world, with homes with happy wives who happily bake and make their own clothes and decorate their homes while lovingly raising their children, and husbands are strong leaders who work hard and lead their families with a strong arm. These families are filled with love for each other and joyfully attend church and psalm sings, send their children to Logos or homeschool, go on to NSA, and start the process all over again. At least that's what's portrayed to the outside. And if you dare show another facet of this, then you're reprimanded. Maturity in Christ Church is not considered what traditional Christians and the Bible teach. Your capacities and your tastes will show your maturity. You like the robust psalms and the warlike hymns and complicated music, and you have reached an acceptable level of maturity. If you can drink and smoke and burn things, then you're mature. If you wield sarcasm and make fun of the liberals, then you're mature. If a man never cries, but leads his family with a firm hand, then he is mature. Knowledge and having read 1,000,000 books are maturity, according to them. Understanding complicated sentences and vocabulary is maturity. But women can't be trusted because they are emotional, and emotions are not a good thing, especially negative emotions. Christ Church people do know how to have fun and have a good time. They enjoy being with each other, and they do engage in many creative and joyful activities within their community. If this facade didn't hide a much darker side, then Moscow, Idaho, and Christ Church just might be the El Dorado that they claim it to be.
Awesome. So the way you ended that, talking about women not allowing to have emotions because they're women and emotions are fickle, that's a good transition to this next question. How are women treated at the church? And in particular, how does the culture of patriarchy and authority and submission, I think people think like, oh, those are just theological concepts, don't really touch on the ground. But how does that authority submission actually play out in male-female relationships at Christ Church that you've seen?
Well, the way that women in the church in Moscow are treated has been a hot topic, and one which the church defends itself by putting forth women who say that they're happy and well treated. They have a whole bunch of women lined up who will testify that what their opponents say about the way women are treated is just not true. I believe there are a few different things to consider when faced with this apparent reality. First of all, I believe that there is a double standard within the community. The women that are high up and that are known in the public sphere seem to have very happy, fulfilled lives. They love to tell other women that they are doing wrong and give them instructions on how to be a good wife. They cannot afford to not be happy, and their husbands cannot afford for them to be mistreated. There is an implicit agreement that they must show the ideal family, and so they strive to be that ideal family. The pressure on everyone in the family is strong, and wives and children conform willingly because they are convinced that this is the right way to live, and they have too much to lose if they were to live otherwise. And they are happy to a certain extent because as long as they make it work, everyone gets something out of it. Then you have women who have normal husbands who do not mistreat them because there are some good and sincere, balanced men in the community. But there's a whole nother category that are angry, messed up men who, by listening to Doug Wilson's teaching, feel justified in abusing their wives. These men follow Wilson's teaching and writing to the letter, believing that they are being true men by leading their wives and children with a firm hand, believing that they're entitled to sex, demanding certain things of their wives and children, and excusing sinful and abusive behavior through the so-called biblical call to lead as a man. Women do not exist in and of themselves. They are always dependent on a man, whether it is their father or their husband. It's interesting to see how this is exemplified by the way they become members and take communion. When a couple becomes members of the church, the women stand behind their man, and the man answers on behalf of the women and children. When a child is baptized, the same thing happens. In many CREC churches, communion is given to the man who then distributes it to his family. This in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, hey, there could just be practical reasons for the communion thing. But when you put it together with the teaching and the suffering that many women describe, you realize it's a visual symptom of the way women are viewed. Women do not seem to feel free to disagree with their husbands. In my observation of the way my family functions, even if I strongly suspect that one of the women disagrees with her husband, she will never dare voice that, at least not in public. There is an unquestioning loyalty to the man. This can be a beautiful thing, as in a woman building up and respecting her husband when it is sincere. But there's something off in the way this is played out in Christ Church women. There's a belief that to disagree with your husband, especially if you do so in public, even respectfully, is not being a godly wife. A godly wife will support her husband no matter what, even if he's doing things that are wrong and sinful. Now, what goes on behind closed doors, I don't know. But that never transpires outside of those doors. And the older the man, the more he is to be respected and obeyed. Age is synonymous with wisdom and godliness. A man's greatest honor is to have his family around him, honoring him and listening to him and almost worshiping him. Now, they would never describe it as such, but in practice, this is what it comes down to. The patriarch is surrounded by his adoring wife and family and grandchildren, and that is the measure of success. Family becomes an idol, and the family bows in submission to the patriarch, both by their attitudes and words, because this is how God's blessing is bestowed. If someone in a family dares to step out of this and not show unity and loyalty, then they are considered rebellious and bitter. There is somewhat of a double standard as well among the women in what is allowed or expected of them. If you are in Doug Wilson's close circle, you're allowed to have a career, dress as scantily as you wish, and have a public voice. You will hear videos telling you not to do certain things or to do things a certain way, but then you realize that Doug Wilson's daughters or others within his close circle do those very things. And these are the women that will be shown in public. See how free they are, how they're strong women that use their gifts and talents? They're not abused women. But you will always hear the same women speaking and giving others lessons on how they should live their life. And they will not hesitate to let you know if you don't live up to their standard. I remember getting an email from Rachel Denkovich once letting me know that a post that I had put up on social media about being a mother was complaining and that I should not post that way. I was slightly confused as I thought my post was actually quite positive, and I barely knew this woman who thought she had the right to call me out on the things I should post or not.
Perfect. And again, you're really good at transitioning to the next question, because it says women are expected to fit the mold, and as long as they fit the mold, they're supposedly happy and submissive, and everything's going well. But that's at least a facade. So we'll get there. But what happens when someone starts questioning? They're like, you know what? I'm not sure this is what I want for myself, nor do I see this in scripture. This seems more like cultural appropriation than it does theological. So what happens when somebody starts questioning? And then how are those women or men treated in the church?
Oh boy. Well, when someone starts questioning any aspect of Christ Church, the theology or Doug Wilson or the way they do things, you're told a number of things. You're told that you do not understand what really happened or what was said, that it was taken out of context, and that word did not mean what you say it means. You're told that you should not talk about things that you don't understand, that you are not in Doug Wilson's shoes, and if you would have done the exact same thing if you had the information he has. Then, if you insist, things just start to get more tense, and you're told that you're siding with the enemy, with people that are angry and bitter and just want to take Doug Wilson and Christ Church down. You are told that you're helping Satan by listening to lies and to people that hate God and hate Christ Church. And then you start being the object of attack. Your personal character is put into question. They stop talking with you or sharing things with you because you are no longer trustworthy. Anything you say is dismissed because if you don't agree with Doug Wilson, well, then you're discredited and not worthy of being listened to. And they make you start to feel like you're going crazy. I remember once commenting on a post that was slightly critical of something Doug Wilson said. Somebody from the church called my family members to tell them, and they immediately contacted me, telling me to take my comment down, and were very insistent about it. When you become vocal about concerns, you become the enemy. Emotional blackmail is used. If you were part of Christ Church and received anything from them, it is used against you, saying, how can you say such horrible things about people that were so generous to you, who were so kind to you? How can you bring such shame on us by siding with those that want to bring Christ Church down? And then if you don't repent, they say you're bitter. When someone doesn't fit the mold, they're slowly ostracized and cast away. They are shunned, and there is a lot of talk about them behind their backs. I remember being shocked some of the first times that I attended Christ Church to see the names of people in the bulletin and then mentioned during prayer had been excommunicated. The public nature of constantly bringing them up seemed a bit excessive to me, especially in such a personal way. It wasn't just a prayer for those that had walked away from the Lord. And I've wondered if one day my name might end up on the list, even though I'm a very committed Christian and in good standing with my own church. Over time, those that don't fit the mold and who are rejected are considered to be worldly lost people who didn't follow the biblical, or rather Doug Wilson's way of doing things, and so they shouldn't be surprised if they have hard things happen to them. They are reaping what they are sowing. This also makes the people in Christ Church feel justified in taking actions against people in order to save them or to retaliate for things they consider were done to wrong them. Incredible damage was done to me, my husband, and children through this kind of action. There's a very strong sense of cause and effect, and if you or someone in your family do have problems, they will know why and will justify this by taking verses out of context to prove that you have caused this. Mental health is seen as only a spiritual problem, one that can be solved if you would just obey and be faithful. People with mental health issues are seen as weak and immature, and there's no compassion for them, but instead they are scorned and judged.
This was not my original set of questions, but I'm curious, and I've heard this over and over, both from Wilson's, actually not from Wilson himself, but some of his acolytes and many who are big time Wilson followers. And this relates to the questions of not fitting the mold and questioning. Have you ever heard of their phrases like, do you even know what time it is? If you're like, hey, this is not a good thing for us to do. Why are we saying these things about these people? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? And they say, do you even know what time it is? They're trying to say that the culture is so far backwards that we can't play nice anymore. We have to utilize these unbiblical weapons or whatever it is. Have you heard that? Or if not, like what do you generally hear when they say like, hey, I don't think this is a good thing for us to do? What do they do to justify themselves into no, we have to do this because we're so far gone. We have to be a little more creative in our weapons.
They tend to just build up how incredibly inspired Doug Wilson is, and how biblical he is, and his character, and how wonderful he is, and with that, anything he says goes, and it justifies the means, justify the ends, and it justify the means.
Okay. That's because that's what you just said is a title of one of our episodes on marketing. That's what I see. Is I come from marketing myself, and so I see the tactics they use, and they say as long as our ends are met, we can use whatever means that get us to those ends, because the ends, like you said, they're so urgent and necessary that any means possible is proper because the ends are what justify it.
Yes, and we experienced that because my family went very, very far in the extreme measures they took to do something to our family. And that was justified because they thought they were saving somebody.
Yep.
And because we were not doing what they thought we should do, therefore they were justified in doing it.
Yep, we've heard that many such times. All right, so second to last question. For someone who's interested in joining, like you talked about the end of your first question, a tight-knit group, you said, well, if this wasn't a facade, this would be amazing. But if somebody's looking at joining a tight-knit group, they're looking at Moscow, or you can say like one of the Moscow branches across the world or across the United States, they see the happy families, they see the submissive wives, they see the strong husbands, the obedient children, the fellowship meals, Sabbath meals. They see all the books that they put out. They see all the marketing materials. So they see everything. And they say like, yeah, I want to be part of this kind of community. This is fighting the good fight. They're fighting the culture wars. What would you say to somebody who's interested in joining Christ Church or one of these types of churches? And what counsel or warnings would you give them?
Oh, I would say, please beware. It is too good to be true. One of two things will happen. You'll either fit in so well that you'll become an arrogant, conceited, and so proud of your success in countering culture and standing up for robust Christianity that you'll become like Pharisees in the Bible. But in doing so, you stop thinking for yourself and you ignore most of what the Bible has to say about true Christian character. You will start judging others who don't do as well as you. You will have a polished outside veneer, but inside, your life and heart will be empty because what Christ Church promises and seeks to accomplish is not what God created you for and what Christ died for. You will alienate yourself from other Christians who don't believe the same thing you do, even if they are on the same side. You may be tempted to be abusive, and you run the risk of your kids being abused or becoming abusers. You run the risk of losing sight of the gospel because you will be so caught up in this culture war and the right way to do things. Or you will have a hard time meeting their standard, and you will feel crushed and unworthy. If you try and express your true feelings, you will be told to try harder and to obey, because faith and obedience are the same thing in their eyes. There will always be a reason that comes down to you for your failures, and the solutions they give you will be a set of things to do in order to be faithful. They will say the words grace without understanding what that word means, and will twist it and use it against you until you're utterly destroyed. Oh, it all looks so good. So much of the theology and ideas and culture seem to be what the world needs. And at first it is. But then you dig deeper and you start to understand what they put behind words like obedience and faith. You start to hear about the abuse and horrible situations that have happened there. But it will be too late. If you dig, question, or wonder about them, you will be labeled as a troublemaker, bitter and angry against God's elect and rejected. Oh, the language will say that they love you and they just want the best for you. But the reality will be oh so different.
All right. Now speaking to those who are inside, those who are inside the church, and maybe they've had little inklings, they've had a rock in their shoe that they weren't sure what it was, that they're starting to question things, and maybe they're starting to listen to this series and thinking, oh shoot, this is happening to me, or this is happening to my family, my friends. I didn't know the extent. I didn't know what was happening behind the doors. I didn't know what was happening behind the scenes or underground. And they're wondering, what do I do? Like, how do I get out? Who do I talk to? Everyone's entrenched in this system. And they think, but maybe they think, so much good is happening here. And there's all this bad in culture. Like, where do I go? Because it seems like this is the only place that's doing what I think should be done, but it's also doing it in a way that I don't think it should be done, and at the expense of a lot of people's sanity and at the expense of women and children for the sake of men. So what would you say to them?
Well, it's interesting that you talk about the good, because yes, there is a lot of good, and people tend to think, well, it outweighs the bad, so I'm going to stay. But I would say, please open up your hearts and listen to those who have suffered so deeply. Christ stood up for the weak and wounded. He did not grind them into the dust, gloating and exulting over their demise. He wept for them. He never spoke about sinners with disdain and insults. And when he had strong words, it was for the Pharisees. Read your Bible, all of it, and compare all the verses that talk about what Christian character is. And ask yourself if the Bible gives anybody the right to act differently. Perhaps there are liberals that hate Christianity. It is the way Doug Wilson treats them, the way Christ treats them. Christ died for sinners, and they may repent and end up in heaven with you. Are you ready to spend eternity with people who have been called names and who have been spoken about in such crude, insulting ways? Ask yourself why so many God-fearing, Bible-believing, sincere and Reformed Christians are speaking up against what is happening there. And no, it is not because they're jealous of Doug Wilson or because they're trying to hide their failures. Don't listen to people who have everything to lose if they were to leave or criticize. Please think for yourselves. Examine and discern what is true and what is God-pleasing or not. Christians will be known for their love, not their rhetoric or sarcasm, robust singing or political stand, or by how many books they've written or people come to their church or read their blog. Christians will be known by their desire to see the gospel proclaimed and who put Jesus Christ and the cross first and foremost in all they do and say. They will be known by their fruits of the Spirit, not by their robust engagement with culture and their strong families or their sarcastic talk. There are ways to engage the culture and to humbly serve the Lord without ignoring some major parts of the Bible. Please, I beg of you, come back to Jesus and the humility of the cross, the real meaning of biblical love, in order that your behavior will be a sweet aroma to the world around it, and not a stench that drives the lost world away.
That was really good. It's a really good ending. Now, without the questions, now it's just anything. If there's anything on your mind or your heart, especially now that you want to speak with your voice, I'm curious if there's any final thoughts that you want Christ Church members to listen to, family members. You don't have to call them out. Anything that you want people to hear from you in particular, anything that's in your heart at all for those who are listening.
Please listen to people who are suffering, who are trying to say things. They're not out to get you. They're not trying to destroy you, but they have stories that have deep consequences. And humble yourselves enough to be able to listen to their pain. Humble yourselves enough to at least question that maybe everything that has been done there or every way that you have reacted may not be right. And there is so much forgiveness for those that have been hurt, that want to have a relationship with you, but your arrogance and the fact that you're so conceited and won't humble yourself stops that. So please just listen to the suffering.
Lastly, I spoke with a couple with separate stories in a CREC and then a combined story at another. If you remember Clena's story of her courtship and marriage to a man 10 years her senior, begun when she was 16, the woman in the stories will strike a similar chord, except the age gap was wider. I talked to the anonymous wife of the couple first about what happened to her.
Yeah, so I was 21 and I had a degree under my belt and I had started working on a graduate degree. But being in those circles, I very much wanted to get married and have a family. And that was very much what was expected of a young woman. But I had also been told very bluntly by at least one man in the church that, I was, and a quote from the one was, I was too old and too well educated and nobody was going to want me now.
At 21 years old, you were too old.
I was too old and too well educated.
With a bachelor's degree.
With a bachelor's degree. Yeah. And part of a master's. So, I was rapidly headed out of anywhere married.
You're on your way to doctorate and no man.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that was pretty soul crushing. That I was told I was being viewed that way. And so I was at yet another wedding in which the bride was no older than I was. And kind of an older eccentric man at the church very deliberately introduced me to a man. And he was 17 years my senior. My initial thought was, wow, I really don't think so.
Double your age almost, yeah.
Right. Yeah. He was far closer to my mother's age than to my age. But the next day at church, there was a potluck after church every Sunday at this church. And he ended up sitting with my mom and I after church and, wanting to get to know me and then asking for my email address. And so we exchanged email addresses and a correspondence started, and he did proceed to pursue me. And we lived 5 or 6 hours apart from each other. He was just up for the wedding. And so then he would come to visit on occasional weekends and we would email. And every time he came to visit, I would think, man, I really don't know about this. But I've got that voice in the back of my head saying, nobody's going to want you.
Yeah, you're too old and too educated, so this is your only shot.
Right. And then somebody at church would say, hey, he's such a great guy and I'm so excited for you. Always a man, but he's such a great guy and we're so excited for you. Although interestingly enough, after that first Sunday when he had sat with us, one of the deacons called my mom and had said, if she were my daughter, I would be saying no. And when my mom had asked, okay, why not? I'd be really interested in knowing why. He wouldn't really give an answer. And in fact, later ended up calling to say, I'm really sorry. I shouldn't have said anything. He's fine. Which was quite interesting. And so things kind of proceeded like this. He would come and visit and I would go, I'm not comfortable and I don't know. And then I would hear, he's so great. He's, we're so excited for you. And I would think, okay, I guess we'll keep trying.
Yeah. Was he a CREC member? Was he another?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That makes sense.
And he was close friends with one of the elders in the church that I was attending,
Okay.
who was also married to someone who was about as many years his junior.
Huh. Okay.
So
this
he
was
was
not
very excited about
Yeah,
it.
this is not not unnatural. This is somewhat a normal,
Right.
scheme of events.
Yeah, this is not unheard of.
Yeah.
And then eventually he proposed, and I still was not entirely comfortable, but I was still hearing nobody was going to want me in the back of my head. And in my naivety, I thought, if he's proposing, he must really love me. And I said yes. From then, things really kind of escalated. He would do things like tickle me and tickle me and tickle me. And I would say, please stop. You're hurting. You're actually hurting me. Please stop. And he wouldn't stop until I was yelling, stop, you're hurting me. And I would leave these, quote, fun tickling sessions with bruises.
Oh my God.
It was not fun by any stretch on my end. When I said he was hurting me, he was hurting. And I was leaving with bruises. But then he would complain to this elder who was his friend and was married to a woman who was as many years his junior, who was doing our premarital counseling at this point.
Oh, good.
That I was being disrespectful by yelling at him.
Makes a lot of sense.
Right. And so then, I would be gently talked to, and, it wasn't ever a harsh voice, but talked to about how I approached such things. And I just would always be thinking, I don't know what to do.
Was he ever approached like, hey, maybe you should not do what you're doing?
I remember he was told once, and an analogy was used from this man's own marriage that, maybe, especially after we get married, to, touch me gently, because I was probably just timid and shy and I needed to warm up to physical touch and affection. And I'm thinking, gosh, no, that is not what's happening here.
I don't want his attention. Yeah.
Right. At this point, I'm afraid of being touched by him.
Yeah.
Because I'm leaving with bruises. But I can tell I'm also just not being believed. And, just the way he's talking too. I remember once a very strong innuendo was made at somebody's house about what our marital bedroom life would be like.
Okay.
And just wanting to shrivel into their couch, and die. And he's sitting there all with almost pride, I'm his conquest.
Well, he's got a 21-year-old girl.
Mm-hmm.
He's a 38-ish-year-old
Right.
man. Like, that's I could see why he's like, yeah, this is going to be pretty good. And you're like, no.
Yeah. And I actually, I had come home. I was living with my mom because I had some significant health issues. I had 2 major surgeries within less than a year, and then was on some medications following that. And once he point blank asked me, he was not concerned about my health. He said, how does your medication, how will it affect your performance?
Oh, gosh.
And again, as a 21-year-old in those circles, I just wanted to shrivel up and die. Yeah. And I was also very concerned that he was not concerned about me. He was concerned about how my physical health was going to affect his experience. Yeah, it was hard. And once we were at his family's home, and there was some of his family I actually liked quite a lot.
Mhm.
And one of his family members asked, kind of teasingly, like, after you get married, what's one thing you would like to change? And at this point, I had been through enough to know that, oh man, this is not a question I want to have to answer. And they're all looking at me expectantly. And I'm thinking I could get in a lot of trouble, like a lot of trouble for answering this. And I come up with the most benign thing I can think of that's actually true. And I say, I would like to start buying 2-ply toilet paper.
Huh.
And this comes back to the elder doing our premarital counseling, that again, I have embarrassed him and been disrespectful. And I'm just thinking, he has made comments and innuendos about our sexual life and what he's expecting in people's homes. And I can't make a comment about 2-ply toilet paper without a complaint coming to the elders. And I don't know how I'm going to live this life. Just actually survive it. There were other interesting things that, we never have concrete proof of, like
Sure.
his mom was gone for a weekend, but I was visiting him. So I stayed in her apartment, and I was on some medication for sleep due to some of those health problems. And I woke up in the morning and my phone was not where I had left it at night. And about 2 weeks later, and this was back flip phones, like people didn't play on their phones,
No.
really. And about 2 weeks later, one of my friends was goofing off and grabbed my phone and went to the camera roll, which there was like nothing on because we didn't use our phones as cameras back
No, we
then.
didn't. Nope.
And there was a series of photos of me sleeping in his mom's apartment,
So weird.
which was just extremely bizarre. And he was the only one with a key that we were aware of. Of course, that was denied, and we were told repeatedly by men at the church that this would be totally outside what we knew of his character. And I guess, we'll never know for sure, but it certainly was one more thing that made
It does make sense in the
us
context of
uncomfortable.
his comments and sexual innuendos and stuff. Is like, it's not outside of that character if he's saying all this stuff and then taking
Right.
pictures of you unbeknownst to you.
Right. So we got to 2 weeks before the wedding, and I was physically ill over it, just almost catatonic. And my mom finally asked, can you do this? Do you want to do this? And I said, I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think I can. And so we met with the elder who was doing our premarital counseling, and he said, okay, well, eventually after some conversation, if that's really what you think you need to do, then he deserves you going and doing it in person. So we made the 6-hour drive
Goodness.
and went and saw him. And we were sitting around his dining room table, and told him that this was not something that I could follow through with. We needed to call off the engagement. And his response was, he looked to my mom, and he looked at me, and he looked back at my mom, and he said, what I'm wondering is if this is a decision she should even be allowed to make. He had used as an endearment kiddo at times, which I did not appreciate when we were engaged. And at that point, I remember thinking, that really is how you viewed me. If I'm not even permitted to make decisions about who I'm going to marry now.
Yeah.
I went back out to the car, and my mom stayed behind because we were close enough to the wedding that some of my things, like some off-season clothing and some other things, had started to move into his place. And she stayed to collect those. And while she did that, where I could see it, he started to throw things away that I had given him during the course of our courtship and engagement, where I could watch him throw things away, which just felt very, very harsh. It was already hard enough. Then we were close enough to the wedding. It's not like we could send things out individually to everyone who'd been invited. So the church sent out an email, kind of blanket covering the church and some others that people would have been invited from. And what was officially said was that we had differences in communication style that were too large to overcome at this point. What I was told personally was that I was not mature enough to be married and to submit myself to the leadership of a husband. What was also interesting was afterwards, I'd been hearing all along what a great guy he was. This was overwhelmingly from men. Afterwards, I had a large number of women tell me how relieved they were for me, that they had never been comfortable around him and had misgivings and had wanted to talk to me. But, these were all married women, and that their husbands had forbid them from doing so because they didn't have concrete incidents or things that they could say, this is a problem, just a general, something's not right here feeling. And then, even after all the innuendo and the bruises and things that should be disqualifying for church leadership, he did go on to be a deacon in his CREC church.
Lastly, I asked both husband and wife for advice for those considering joining one of these CRECs, the veneer of perfection and righteousness on display in these communities, and what really happens when you have need or spot something shady. Here's what they said.
I think they draw you in with this appeal of their strong families and their beautiful communities, and appealing to especially the men and even certain women, the serrated edge and their wit and their words. But when you start to dig deeper, all of that, it doesn't lead to the kind of depth that you think it does. And when you get out of it, you start to realize how much bigger the love of God is than what you were ever led to believe. And what they have is so very small.
Shallow.
Yeah.
Very shallow.
Very shallow. And I know they would want to take a statement like that and say that, well, people who think that want to encompass, all these unbelievers.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not even what I mean.
We'll be backing you up on this 100%. We will show it.
There's so much more depth to the love of God than what they know, than what they can even fathom in the system. I think
they have a hard time with the love of God. I think
they do.
Yeah, they have a hard time with expand. I mean, this is why. I mean, I'm a big fan of Tim Keller, and Keller's thing is, he makes a great point where we have a hard time with the grace of God, with the love of God, because it brings sinners in, and we have a hard time with that. We have a hard time with people who are bad, looking at ourselves who are bad, whatever it may be, for the other, and saying, does God really take that one in?
Yep. I think one of the big takeaways looking back on everything is I think about all the ways that love was redefined, and what was done in the name of love, that loving your neighbor means doing this or that. Yeah. And ultimately what it comes down to is they get to basically act just like the rest of the world, but they get to feel good about it. They get to be just as greedy, just as mean, just as uncaring, but they get to go to heaven and the others don't.
Yeah, but they're advancing the kingdom of God and growing it. So it's okay to use these means.
Yeah. And that's all that is what real love is. If you really love that person, you wouldn't help them right now because you're just going to encourage them in their sin and whatnot. And it basically comes down to you don't really have to do anything for anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Except for the leadership of the church, of course. But loving your neighbor, no. You don't have to do anything for anybody. You can rationalize your way out of it and be perfectly in line with your church.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like the ultimate danger with the CREC. Its specialty is just rationalizing not having to love your neighbors at all.
And I think the big thing that the CREC, and the church I attended prior to that, but the CREC has left me with in my relationship with God that I still struggle with is fear.
Yep.
There's
People hear
still
that.
a lot of fear.
Yep.
I'm deeply distrustful and fearful of anybody in church authority right now. Like I don't like pastors and I hate that. But if you're a pastor, my shields go up real fast.
Mm-hmm.
Real fast. Anybody in any kind of religious authority, shields are up. And it's going to be really hard for you to break through. And I'm very conscious of that, but it's hard to get out of that. I don't know if I'll ever really fully be able to do that. I'm always in the back of my mind going to be thinking like, okay, where are the possibilities for abuse here? Where can you get me? I will never in my life work for a Christian ever. I don't want a Christian boss, at least not anywhere in church in my own community. I work remote for people in Texas and I live in Idaho, so I don't have to worry about it. But I will never take a job from anybody who's in a church that's local to me ever, because I am so burned by all that connection of the business and the church and just how tangled and how much they can get you. And I'm using they like it's this conspiracy thing, and yet
no, I got what you're saying. Yep, I got what you're saying. Yeah, we will substantiate that. We will name the they. I want to thank Hayley, the anonymous woman with the Christchurch Moscow connections, and the anonymous couple for their courage to share their stories. It should strike you as odd that people even have to come on anonymously for fear of the blowback that they might receive as a result of sharing publicly what happened to them. May this be a rebuke against those churches and communities who have forced this anonymity on them instead of facing the problems head on. The church should be a place of deep intimacy and connection, not one of vengeance, with front-facing superiority and love, but underneath, a brood of vipers. As we conclude, if you have a story like Hayley's, the anonymous woman with a deep family connection at Christchurch Moscow, or the couple with both personal and combined experiences, please know you're not alone. Know we care about you, and many others do as well. Reach out to us. Find out how to do so in our show notes, but do so safely, especially if you're still in an environment like the movements we're profiling. There really is help out there for you, and we'll help you find it. In part 6, we continue profiling stories of abuse in the Series C. There is more. See you then. Sons of Patriarchy is brought to you by the administrators of Examining Doug Wilson in Moscow in partnership with Peter Bell. It's written, produced, and edited by Peter Bell. Original music, sound design, and mixing by Aaron Feeney. This series wouldn't be possible without the dozens of abuse survivors whose bravery and vulnerability make it what it is. Every episode was sent to them before being published, and their feedback, edits, encouragement, and eventual approval make this what it is. May your voices be heard far and wide. Thank you.